Hey everybody, the first North American OverPower League tournament of 2026 is almost here. To be held in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania at the Gamer's Edge Comic and Games, this event is not to be missed. To get you ready for the event, we're going to recap the data from the 2025 season and tell you which characters, Battlesites, Homebases, and more were played this year, and what made it to the top 8, top 3, and all the way up. But before we get into that, let's talk about why it'll be worth the trip to make it to Pennsylvania. This is going to be one of the NAOL Majors tournaments, and that means that the prize support is going to be great. Every player who makes it to the Gamer's Edge is going to get an exclusive alternate art power card from the upcoming Few and Cursed release. These are going to be really hard to get because you can only get it by showing up, which will make this card one of about 40 or so copies that are going to exist in the world. If you happen to make it into the top 8, you'll get a foil version of that same card, and only about 10 of those are going to be released, so talk about rare. There will also be great game mat draws, booster boxes, pins, prize money splits. It's going to be a great event at the Gamer's Edge, so if you're anywhere in New England or the Great Lakes, make the trip. And to get you prepared, let's talk about how last year went. There's going to be one caveat. I don't have the Battle for Boston data from last year, so none of those characters or decks are included in this recap. One of the biggest differences between Legacy and modern overpowered play is the characters that get used. Modern gameplay features characters created by LRG, namely in the Edgar Rice Burroughs and the World Legend set so far. Legacy not only has a much bigger character pool, pulling from the original Marvel, DC, and Image sets, as well as including the LRG characters. This makes for around 350 characters in Legacy compared to the 43 from Modern.
Sadly, the 2025 NAOL season showed that choice has mostly been an illusion. We've only seen a total of 119 different characters actually used in Legacy. That's 119 out of 371, less than a third of those available. I'll put the numbers on your screen now. Compare that to the ERB characters in Modern, where 70% of characters have made it to the top 8 and nearly all of them have been played during tournaments. Before we move on from that, the Marvel sets made up almost 70% of the total game, whereas DC only had 3%, Image 5%, and LRG about a quarter.
In Legacy, many decks follow a different deck building paradigm than Modern does. Because there are so many cheap characters, as well as more 8-stack characters, most of whom are less expensive too, we have the staple deck being 2 8s and a negate. Like it sounds, these decks have at least 2 characters who have an 8 stat, often backing each other up, as well as a character who can play a non-1 per deck negate. The final spot usually goes to a character that can add some team defense. Sometimes that defensive character is placed up front. However, the more common outlet is to place that defensive character in reserve. The reason for that is that most Legacy characters are mostly inert and reserve. There are only a very small handful who can do anything at all back there, so having a character that has a card like this, a team defense which can be played from reserve, is extremely powerful, and has led to almost every deck playing one of these few in number characters in the back. With that in mind, let's take a look at the most played characters from the 2025 NAOL season.
And the top 5 has Scarlet Witch at number 1 with 26, Beast the Brute at number 2 with 22, Silver Sable and Spawn at number 3 with 21, Doctor Strange at number 4 with 20, and Spider-Woman in 5th place with 19 appearances. 2 of these, Scarlet Witch and Beast the Brute, are negators. Scarlet Witch carries the energy teams and Beast fills the strength teams. No combat negators and intelligence negators made it, and we'll see why in a bit. Then you have the 3 common reserve characters with those team defenses that we talked about earlier. Those are Silver Sable, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Woman to fill those roles. And that just leaves a single character on the roster who's there because of his 8, Spawn. Granted, he's not just an 8. He has one of the most broken cards in Legacy, and one I hope that never makes it into the modern game as less than a 1 per deck, and that's the full team avoid of 9 or less. Add in the rest of his kit and he's in the discussion for the best character in the game. If you run the numbers, this means that 36% of decks ran one of these top 2 negators, and 46% ran one of those 3 defensive reservists. That's not a lot of variety. And there's more. In Legacy, there are 9 characters with an AO code negate. The others, Donald Pierce, Holocaust, Mojo, Mole Man, Reavers, Serpent Society, and X-Babies accounted for another 38 decks, or another 29%. Add in the LRG negators, Dracula, Merlin, Mina, Morgan, Mummy, Sherlock Holmes, and Van Helsing, and that's another 31 appearances, or 23%, and you have something astounding. 89% of the 132 legacy decks ran a character who can negate. Ugh. We have 371 characters, and most teams felt like they had to pick between these 16 characters. People talk about needing a Reaper defense in Modern, but 89% of decks didn't have Leonidas and Deja Thoris. Add to it the fact that over half the decks had one version or another of Doctor Strange and Spider-Woman, and I feel dejected. In a game that's all about picking your favorite roster from a huge list of characters, most players are forced to use up half their spots on 2 of 6 or 7 characters, which is kind of a Debbie Downer, so let's move on. Because I didn't like that top 5 list, let's open it up to the top 10 so we can see a few more characters. Running out the list are X-Babies at number 6, Heroes for Hire and Hercules at number 7, Cthulhu at number 8, Zeus at number 9, and Juggernaut and Mr. Fantastic tied for number 10. All told, these 13 characters, or 4% of the total character pool, made up 42% of all the characters played in 2025. But things aren't set in stone, and other types of decks have a chance to win too. In fact, not too long ago at the OP Cup, a deck with Zealot, Joan of Arc, Wonder Woman, and Silver Sable won. Only one out of those really common characters. It's great to see someone gutsy enough to bring something different to the table, and not only that, taking a combat deck all the way to the win. And speaking of which, let's take a look at the colors of what was played. In this ranking, I went off the character's highest grid to affiliate them with energy, combat, brute force, or intellect. If the character had a tied grid, I called them unaffiliated. Remembering the colors from the top 10 gives you a hint about what was seen in the field. Hint, it's energy and brute force all the way. As you can see, energy and brute force led the field with 28 and 25% of characters. Unaffiliated had 18, combat 17, and intellect trailed with only 12%. But it's not an even split because the characters aren't divided up evenly. A quarter of all characters are combat, so their low representation is even more dramatic. So now let's take a look at the characters which make it to the top 8. Do they tell the same story? And remember, green is overrepresented and red is under. And the answer is yes. Brute force and energy lead the way, and in this case, brute force is even stronger. They dominated the top 8. The top 3 tells a similar story, but an interesting takeaway is that intelligence and combat didn't drop to near zero. They're still there. A few decks from each of the colors hit the podium, and at least one intelligence deck and one combat deck took victories. This shows that any color has a chance for victory. Let's turn to some individual character performances. Alright, this is my spreadsheet, the man behind the curtain. So I've got all characters who were played throughout the 2025 season, and I've got how many made it to the top 8, top 3, and won it all. I've also got it broken down by the different franchises, so the Marvel 3 stats, Marvel 4 stats, DC Image, and LRG. So currently I've got all the characters who never showed up in a tournament filtered out, so everything displayed is characters who have appeared. Scrolling over, I wanted to be able to judge how well each characters did. And because I didn't have specific win-loss data, I decided to give a metric for how many characters made it to the top 8 versus how many were played. Obviously, there's more factors than that go into a victory than just their presence, but I thought that was an interesting indicator. So you can see that Doctor Strange 3 stat made it to the top 8 3 times out of 9 appearances, or 33.3%. I also hid this percentage if the character showed up fewer than 5 times because I felt that would not be enough data to get a accurate win or loss percentage. So let's focus on the season-wide data instead of from the specific regionals. And I'll scroll down a little bit so you can see which characters were played before we dive into it in depth. We're going to have a bunch of different things that I'm going to note that I think are really interesting to talk about. So here's all the DC characters, the image, and actually you can see a bunch of different LRG characters who made it as well. So we won't go into the Battlesite data just yet. But one thing I thought was very interesting was that there were 4 characters that won who actually did not show up very frequently. You can see there's Shadow King and White Queen made it here, even though they showed up fewer than 5 different decks. Wonder Woman, 5 different decks, Zealot, 4 decks, and then you also have King Arthur, who just showed up a single time, and that single time was enough to bring him to victory. I guess that's why he's the king. But the correlation to that is that even though the characters showed up a lot, it doesn't necessarily mean that they won a lot either. So Scarlet Witch showed up 26 times, did have 2 victories, but only made it to the top 8 7 times. So it's only a 27% or so return. Another takeaway is that you'll notice how few DC and Image characters were brought into the tournaments. Now, a lot of the DC characters are way worse than their Marvel counterparts, but that's not all true. There definitely are some decent DC characters out there, and I hope that we see a wider list of DC and Image characters showing up in the future. Especially as the hype for Top Cow rises, I am hoping that Image was going to jump up too. Let's hide some of these lesser seen characters, and by that I'm going to mean anything that was seen fewer than 5 times. And now that that's done, let's see how well these off-played characters made it to the elimination rounds. The biggest standout, I think, while looking at this, is Invisible Woman, because she's made it to the top 8 over 80% of the times that she showed up. Out of the 6 decks played, 5 decks made it to the top 8, which is pretty incredible. So congratulations, Sue Storm. And when we look at the negators, for instance, Beast the Brute, X-Babies, Scarlet Witch, you'll see that Beast the Brute really helped out those brute force decks. Got a 50% conversion rate to the top 8, which is pretty high. That number did not carry through for the other characters. You see 22% for X-Babies, 27% for Scarlet Witch, 40% on Donald Pierce. Which goes to show that for the most part, because almost every deck had to bring in Negator, it did not correlate to victory. And even though Energy was the most played icon throughout 2025, it didn't fare quite as well as Brute Force. You see a lot of these are still pretty high. Inhumans 50%, White Queen 40%, X-Man 50%. But when you look at some of the big guys like Spawn, it's only a 19% win rate with that character. He did win a tournament, but a lot of people are bringing the Lambo or Cadillac style deck and not having the full success that they would hope with it. Warjammer is another key component of that, only sitting at 22. Now another thing to note is how few intelligence characters we see on here as well. Now we noted that with that 10% or so character inclusion rate, but Dark Beast and Donald Pierce, both negators. Then we have Mephisto, Mr. Fantastic, and Joan of Arc being the only other ones who made it. And the final cool thing that I want to bring up is just how many LRG characters were played and how successful they were. Now you see Cthulhu, Hercules, and Zeus all made it into that top 10 list, but you also have Zorro, who's got a very respectable 63% conversion into the top 8. And another cool thing as well is that there were even some LRG characters who never made it to a top 8 in the modern season who made it to the top 8 here. You can see Angry Mob Modern Age did it twice, Anubis did it once. That was actually me, so I'm really proud of that one. Time Traveler, John Carter of Mars, Van Helsing, Hercules, of course. So very, very cool that now there's only 5 or 6 total LRG characters who've never made it to a top 8 so far. And there's so much more here, but we're not going to go into any more specifics of this because I want to move on. But if you have any questions, leave something in the comment below. I can always look it up for you and let you know the answer. Lastly, let's talk about which characters were played in reserve. Here's the full list. It looks like a lot, but many of these characters made it to fewer than 5 decks, so let's trim those out. And you guessed it, we're down to another tiny list where theoretically we had hundreds of options. But aside from Cthulhu pulled from Modern, the reserve characters this year have been Deathbird, Doctor Strange, Hawkeye, Magneto, Silver Sable, and Spider-Woman. These 6 personas were in 90% of decks. Again, ugh. I hope that Modern can help crack that open, but it'll be hard to compete with those reserve characters who have those 9 or less avoids. I suspect that Doctor Strange, Silver Sable, and Spider-Woman will continue to have a chokehold on the reserve. The other standout difference about Legacy is the ability to play Battlesites. For those primarily used to Modern, Battlesites are an alternative to using any character cards. You're not able to mix and match them, you must choose either one paradigm or the other, any characters or Battlesites.
If you choose Battlesites, you'll be taking one of the original location cards with 6 characters listed on them, and use them to cash cards from these characters under that Battlesite by shuffling a corresponding number of character cards into your deck. For example, you might choose this Avengers Mansion to be your Battlesite. While typically a deck may have 12 or more of these cards, all with different codes stashed under them, let's say you're only playing 2 Black Widow and 2 Thor cards. You take 2 characters each for Black Widow and Thor. These are called activators, and they'd go into your normal deck. These special cards would be tucked underneath the Avengers Mansion, and then whenever you drew an activator, you'd be able to search through for a corresponding card from the activator that you drew. And then that character would be able to make a cameo appearance and make his attack through one of your characters. Now, this adds for a ton of complexity to the game and lets you play characters you might not otherwise get to try.
There are several other rules to Battlesites, but we won't go into them here. With around 42 Battlesite options, only 18 were brought to a tournament in 2025. Only 6 of the 42 Battlesites were used by at least 5 different decks. The defensively heavy Outback was the most run Battlesite and had a correspondingly high top 8 rate too. So this data was very surprising to me. I've heard so many people talk about how Battlesites elevate the game to the next level and are what truly make Legacy such a complicated strategy game. Thus, it was shocking to see how few of the options were actually used. Initially, I took that to mean the meta was far too rigid, but on a second look, I'm more at peace with it. Instead of having 42 wildly varied and exciting options, you have a smaller suite of dependable sites which provide a certain set of cards. That's very comparable to how any characters will be played in Modern, and it seems more palatable that way. But if someone wants to try running something other than the Outback, Onslaught Citadel, or Age of Apocalypse, then I'm there for it. Missions were a bit more varied. However, 3 of them still stood out: Fatal Attractions, Shattered Image, and The Crossing. There are a few others that had good showings too, with a scattering of missions all across the board. Interestingly, Infinity Gauntlet was the one that had the best showing of them all, and the no negate, no activators power of Shattered Images really didn't make that big of a mark. And now let's look at Homebases. Team OverPower was the most frequently seen location, and those numbers are even bigger when you consider the fact that Round Table is basically a reprint of it. But the AnyPower suite, although more welcoming to newer players, didn't really fare so well in the tournaments. Instead, you had places like Dracula's Armory, Barsoom, and Omniverse, which had higher win percentages.
So what does that tell you about Legacy Overpower? Well, the major takeaway is that players appear to like sticking to the meta. The top 10 most played characters made up 42% of decks. Only 8 characters were played much in reserve at all, and 65% of decks included one of the Legacy full negators, mostly Beast the Brute, X-Babies, or Scarlet Witch. We've seen that the characters who have been played most frequently aren't always the ones who win, so I encourage everyone out there to try new things. Don't feel locked into bringing the same characters into a tournament. You never know how things are going to turn out and what your opponents aren't going to expect. But if you got a favorite character that just happens to be heavily played, don't sweat it. This is your game, and some goofy guy on the internet isn't going to force you to play or not play anything. Play the deck that makes you happy. This game's about fun and camaraderie as much as anything else. But if you do want to try something different, then heed my call to widen the playfield of characters, missions, Battlesites that are going to be played this year to showcase the full spectrum of what Legacy has to offer. There's a lot more to glean from the data, but I'll afford you the opportunity to make your own conclusions without listening to me anymore. And that's the wrap up for the 2025 NAOL season. I'll post all these graphics on the NAOL Facebook page and the Discord server, so if you're interested, take a look at those links in the description below. So who are your favorite characters? What are your favorite missions? What Battlesites do you like to play? I'd enjoy hearing about all the different ones that you like and enjoy in the comments. But until next time, good luck in the 2025 season, grab some of those promos, and venture well.